On this spooky night, we are going to turn to one of the scariest and most violent books in the Bible, the Book of Judges. It is the true story that shows us what happens to good people when they stop listening to God and do the scariest thing of all, rely on their own strength. It is a scary tale of the results of compromise. It all started with incomplete obedience. God had told the people of Israel to take the land in the book of Joshua, but they did not finish the job. They made compromises. They didn't get rid of the idol worship, and eventually they even started worshiping the idols themselves. God had called them to be separate from the nations around them, but they intermingled. All it took was the compromises of one generation, and the nation of Israel broke the covenant that they had made with God. The parting of the Red Sea and the walls of Jericho, all the miracles and wonders in the books of Exodus and Joshua, all forgotten, all ignored. As Judges 2, verse 10 says, "And all that generation of Joshua also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel." So they went from being a people under God's divine protection, a nation that all the other nations feared, to a people that continually fell into slavery and horrible sin. They abandoned God, so there were consequences. God did not protect them from the nations around them the way he did when they kept the covenant. He did not leave them, but they chose to leave his protection. And bad things happened because of that. Really bad things. It was bloody and violent and horrible. The book of Judges tells us about some of them. It's graphic and heartbreaking, and it shows us the depths to which we can fall when we're left to our own sinful devices for long enough. God used the bad things that had happened as a wake-up call to his people, so they would come back to him. Every so often, God would send a judge, and the word in Hebrew for that also has a sense of leader or vindicator. The judge would save them for a time, but these never lasted, and the people still made bad choices left and right. It's a pattern that repeats over and over and over. First, the people completely forsake the law of God and choose to walk in their own way. Then they fall into servitude to the other nations. Then things get really bad as a consequence of that. And then when things are at their worst, the people see the wrong they've done and cry out to God to save them. And he sends a judge to save the people when they do this, and he brings them back to him. But then the people get complacent, and they start to rely on their own strength instead of God, and the cycle just repeats over and over and over in the book of Judges. So how does this apply to us? Sometimes we can see a similar cycle in our own lives when we stray from what we know that we're called to be and to do, even as followers of Christ. When we don't keep our eyes on Jesus and rely on our own strength instead, it's our natural inclination to go astray. But we don't have to give in to it. God has given us a way to break this deadly cycle. As Romans 8:2 says, "For the law of the Spirit of life has set you free in Christ Jesus from the law of sin and death. For God has done what the law, weakened by the flesh, could not do." God hears us when we cry out to him, just as he heard the Israelites, and he can help us do what we could not do in our own strength if we just keep our eyes on him. Our key verse for the book of Judges today is Judges 21, verse 25. "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." The judges, even though they were sent by God, they were flawed. They were fallible human beings. None of them were able to save Israel for long, even the most famous ones. Gideon, famous Gideon, He eventually fell into pride and selfishness, and he even ended up in idolatry. Jephthah made a foolish vow and ended up sacrificing his own daughter. Strong, famous Samson, he had a weak character and got into all kinds of trouble as it related to the women he chose. None of the judges were really able to impact the nation for longer than a single generation. When they died, their influence died with them, even the best of them. But God also gave us Jesus. He is our perfect judge, leader, and vindicator. He's able to redeem us and save us for all time. So let us keep our eyes on him, and he will break the cycle of sin and death and free us from being slaves to fear.